In this video, I'm going to be talking about one of the four classes of macromolecules, carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are macromolecules or polymers made up of simple sugar subunits. The monomers for carbohydrates, or the subunits, are also known as monosaccharides, literally one sugar or sweetness unit. Several different monosaccharides can link together to form a polysaccharide or a complex carbohydrate, such as starch or cellulose. The complex carbs usually provide a structural role or some other role for a cell, while the monosaccharides are usually harvested for energy. Of course, either molecule can also have different functions depending on the organism. Let's take a look at some of the different monosaccharides and the different ways in which the monosaccharides are arranged and attached to one another. Here's a view of two examples of a monosaccharide or a simple sugar. Both of these are 5-carbon sugars. They in fact have the same number of atoms. In fact, every monosaccharide or carbohydrate will generally have, for every carbon, an equivalent oxygen and 2 hydrogens. Essentially, for every carbon, there's the equivalent of a water molecule, hence the name carbohydrates. So here you can see that we can take those same 5 carbons, 10 hydrogens, and 5 oxygens and arrange them in different ways. Some of these monosaccharides will typically exist in ring form. Here is an example of arabinose and ribose. You can note that they have somewhat different chemical structures. Here are some 6-carbon simple sugars or monosaccharides. These include glucose, fructose, and galactose. Again, each one of these molecules has the same number of atoms. They have 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. The only thing that is different is how those elements and atoms are arranged. Two monosaccharides can be linked together through dehydration synthesis. This will form the beginnings of a polysaccharide, but typically referred to as a disaccharide, as it's only 2 subunits. Here's an example of 2 different disaccharides. On the left is a combination or linking between glucose and galactose to form the disaccharide lactose. On the right is a link between glucose and fructose to form the disaccharide sucrose. Again, note they have the same chemical formula. Here is slightly different than looking at the monomers alone, because dehydration synthesis removed the equivalent of a water molecule between the two monomers. The general formula for a disaccharide or a polysaccharide will be, for a certain number of carbons, you'll have an equivalent number of waters minus 1 for every linkage you have. Here's another example. Here, 3 monomer subunits have been linked together. You can notice that the subunits are not necessarily always linked through the same carbons and oxygens. Several different points along either each sugar can be used for forming a new bond with another sugar, usually referred to as a glycosidic linkage. Even if you looked at a polymer that was made up only of glucose, the arrangement of these linkages can lead to different molecules. For example, starch could exist as glucose connected in a straight chain. This form of starch is usually referred to as amylose. This is a way that some plants store glucose for energy. In our bodies, we store glucose for energy, particularly in your muscles, in a form known as glycogen, in which some of the linkages between glucose subunits is varied to create a branched chain effect. Still another use for glucose in plant cells is to link them again in a different arrangement to form cellulose. Starch and cellulose, again, both made of the same monomer subunits, both made from linking glucose subunits together, but because the linkage is arranged in a different orientation, this leads to both carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, having different properties, different physical properties, appearance, and different biological properties. Some organisms can digest starch but not cellulose. Humans would be a good example.